Do you buy CBD because you've heard all about the benefits? Or maybe you've wondered about the quality or efficacy of all the different types of CBD brands there are out there. You can actually find it on the corner store, you can find it in the health food store, or you can even go to the gas station. It can cost anywhere from $10 to in the hundreds. So I believe we all need to know what we need to consider if we want to purchase it directly or if we need to buy it from a product that contains it. I was motivated to discuss this topic of CBD because, as you probably already know, I've been going to conferences and congresses and seminars, and I'm currently at the Trichologist on a Mission convention in South Carolina, and it is 70 degrees. It is awesome. But I'm digressing. But at one of my events, there was a presentation by a physician who's done research on CBD, and I was intrigued because he was not only talking about CBD, but he was discussing recent research about how it can help with treating hair loss. And it wasn't the first time that I heard about how CBD can be beneficial, because back in 2019, Dr. Janice Knox was at the same Trichologist on a Mission event that I'm at now, and she talked about its potential. So, this new research is really important, and I wanted to run it past an expert. And so I reached out to Stephen Philpott, who will be joining me in a few minutes. And he is an environmental biology researcher, and he knows a lot more about it than I do. So we will be diving into this topic. My name is Dr. Crystal Porter. I'm a hair scientist and owner of Main Insights, a company that conducts research that focuses on the hair needs of people of African descent. And this platform is designed to elevate the Black hair care industry and empower consumers and hair professionals with education that is driven by scientific research. It's good to see everyone here for the chat. I would love for you to put your name in the chat and let me know where you're from. You can put the number one if you are a hair practitioner. You can put the number two if you are a consumer. And you can put the number three if you are a researcher or scientist like myself. And be sure to like and share this broadcast. Don't want to be stingy. I think some of the topics that we have are really important, and I would love for you to share it with others. So, trying to look and see who is out there today. I see some people are joining, but no one is putting anything in the chat, but that's okay. That's all right. All right. We have Eugenia Porter. Good morning. Yes, morning time in Chicago. And so you probably heard me talk about it's 70 degrees here in South Carolina. It's absolutely gorgeous. The sun is shining. And then we have Andrea. Thanks for joining, Ani. Good to see you. All right. So, if you are frustrated with the lack of information available when it comes to caring for your hair, and you have wasted a lot of time, money, and resources trying to figure things out on your own, then you are at the right place. And that is why we have created the Our Black Hair Matters movement. Now, if you haven't done so already, I would love for you to check out some resources on my, I'm going to call them hair assets page. And you can find documents about how to find the right stylist, on learning about the biggest mistakes that curlies make. And I also have a template. So if you want to write letters to companies, and you want to ask about what's going on with their products and if they could have some scientific research to back up the claims that they make, then I have a template for you. And you can go to links.maininsights.com/info. Let's see if I can pull that up on the screen. There it is right there. And so I'm excited to bring on our guest because I think it is long overdue to talk about CBD because I've been hearing all kinds of things. So, For those of you who are just joining, welcome to the Our Black Hair Matters Lunchtime Chat. I am Dr. Crystal Porter, and I am here today with Stephen Philpott. He is an environmental biologist and the first person that I thought about when I wanted to discuss CBD research and treatment implications. So without further ado, let's bring him on. Hey.
Unmute
All
myself.
right.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. So thank you for bearing with me. I had to make shift in hotel room to do
Oh
this
no, no
lunchtime
worries.
chat. Yeah, so I love what you do. And so I think it will be important for people to get an understanding of who you are and what you do. So can you give us a snapshot of what you do?
Whew, sure. How long do I have? Let me try to keep it under 60 seconds.
Well, okay, I'll give you, you can have at least 2 minutes.
Two, oh, two. Okay, I got you. I
Yeah,
got you.
you're good. You're good.
Um, so I think first and foremost, it's important to say. So I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served as an active duty Marine, and through my experiences in the Marines, after leaving the Marines, just learning about health, wellness, fitness, I saw that people will consume things that they believe. If you tell somebody, "Hey, did you know eating A, B, and C will help you lose 30 pounds?" And how do we know what's true? How do we know what's false? So long story short, I spent 6 years after getting my undergrad in kinesiology and nutrition, studying the human body and fitness and performance. And even after all of that, I felt like there was something missing. Everybody talked about this homeostasis, this balance of the body. And I was like, how you get there? Everybody's looking for balance in the body. Like, where is it? How do you get there? But it was always talked about as this kind of like this arbitrary, oh, it's when everything in the body is just balanced. And I was like, there sounds like there's more to it. And long story short, when I started reading about opioids and people were using cannabis to actually get people off opioids, I kind of got very interested as a military veteran in just learning about the benefits and how could cannabis, this plant, how could it replace opioids? Well, now we know it's so much bigger than that. And I'm an environmental biology researcher, so I actually research hands-on the molecules like CBD, THC, all these secondary metabolites that are produced in the plant. I actually research the structure on the plant where these are created. So I call them like biochemical factories, trichomes, if you will. It's so funny that trichome and trichology, the word trichome is actually Greek for hair. So it's so funny that the trichomes are what's producing these secondary metabolites. And here we are talking about trichology.
Okay, so you're talking about metabolites. You and I know what you're talking about, but a lot of our listeners don't. So can you give us a little bit
Absolutely.
of what metabolites are, or?
Absolutely. So what's really funny is most of these compounds, if you will, THC or CBD, these are actually produced by living plants, mostly female plants, to defend themselves against their environment. So whether they need to repel a pest, whether they need to defend themselves against excess like UV radiation, they produce molecules like THC, they produce things like CBD to actually adapt to their environment. Plants are not producing THC and CBD going, I hope the humans come over here and I hope they take all my THC and CBD. These plants are producing what I call metabolites to adapt and defend and adjust to their environment. So when I say metabolites, I'm referring to the class of molecules, not just THC, not just CBD, but there's hundreds and hundreds of molecules that haven't truly been explored in depth enough, and they do have beneficial qualities.
Yeah, I think the word metabolites, a lot of people may think about the metabolism, right? And how the body processes or how it creates energy. And so I think that people, if you thought of metabolism when you heard metabolites, there's a reason why, because the metabolites are responsible for the energy. So, all right. I also want to say hello to Margaret. So thank you for putting your name in because you come up as Facebook user. Also have another Facebook user that does not have a name. Alyssa, thanks for for joining. You're in Cincinnati. Yes. And then Andrea, like she is a aspiring researcher. That's awesome. We need more. Lots of stuff. Okay, so you talked about THC and CBD, but I don't think people really understand what that is. And so, can you talk about that more and actually talk about this powerhouse of a system that I think is, I mean, when I studied biology, I did not realize that this system even existed. So, when I was coming up, so I'm aging myself, they talked about the reproductive system, the digestive system, endocrine system, but then there's another system. Can you talk about that and its relationship with THC and CBD?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really interesting, because some people say, you researched the plant. What does that have to do with this? What's extremely interesting and a fact that everybody should know is in the 1960s was the first time, they knew that cannabis got you quote unquote high or had a what people call psychoactive effect. But they didn't know what in cannabis was causing that. So in the 1960s was the first time they isolated whatever was causing people to get high. Well, they found out it was THC. Once they isolated THC, they also found that there was CBD as well. So now you have these two molecules or compounds that are being isolated from the whole plant. This is in the 60s. They still didn't know how this THC, once it gets in your body, why is it making you quote unquote high? How is it having these effects? We have a ton of people that are saying it helps with glaucoma, it helps with cancer. They didn't discover the actual receptors in the body where THC and CBD bind to until the 1990s, which is crazy, which is like mind blowing. But what's really interesting is from the 60s to the 90s, there was so much prohibition against cannabis that it made the research very difficult, not only to do, but even the people who did it, their research kind of fell on deaf ears. So in the 1990s, when they discovered these receptors in the body, the first question was, why do humans have receptors in their bodies where plant compounds can bind to? Why when I consume a plant, it gets me quote unquote high, or it helps with my glaucoma, or it helps with my back pain? So they discovered two receptors, and they named them very basically cannabinoid 1 and cannabinoid 2 receptors. So THC and CBD, most people know they're a class of molecular compounds called cannabinoids. And long story short, these receptors, what they found is that they're almost everywhere in the body. And all these systems that you were talking about, we know about reproductive system, we know about the digestive system. Well, they found cannabinoid receptors everywhere in all of these systems. So it's very interesting that we use drugs and different things to target different receptors in the body. We have, everybody knows about dopamine. Everybody knows about opioids. Everybody knows about all these different drugs. But it was so interesting to find out that there's a system that we haven't yet really talked about. And that's the CB1 and CB2 receptors that are part of this endocannabinoid system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excuse me. And so you talk about these receptors, and you were saying that the discovery of these receptors wasn't until the 90s. But I think a lot of people don't appreciate how science works, because we always discover the what first. So we're like, ooh, something is happening. And so we discover that, but then we don't understand how or why it's happening until much later. And I think that, I always talk about how the advancements in technology allows us to get so much more information. And so I think that is probably, what helped to put this on the forefront.
No,
And
absolutely. And I mean, if you, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam is the person who actually first isolated THC and CBD in the 60s. But again, like you said, until the technology advanced in the 90s, they had an ability to do much more in-depth research. And that's how they found out, like, hey, we have a system in the body. And very interesting, I didn't say this same endocannabinoid system is found in humans. It's not special to us. It's found in almost every living organism with the nervous system. So there's jellyfish at the bottom of the ocean that have cannabinoid receptors, but they don't use cannabis. That means that this is a very important basic biological system for most living organisms that we consider part of, the animal kingdom. And that's huge, because you're talking about the 90s. That means we are still at the forefront of really discovering what does this system do in our bodies and why does it interact with so many other things.
Right. So I was talking about Janice Knox earlier, and she really was like, okay, when she was in, well, she was saying when she was getting her medical degree, that she was told that the cardiovascular system was the powerhouse or the master system, and she was like, that has nothing on the cannabinoid system. And you're right, we're just at the forefront. So I'm wondering how many more discoveries there will be in trying to understand why we function the way we function and how the environment really impacts what's going on with us. And so
Absolutely.
that brings me to my next question. So, this is our Black Hair Matters lunchtime chat. And so when Janice Knox was talking about the endocannabinoid system and the effects of cannabis on hair in particular, she was saying that there was some research at the time that was showing that there was inconsistency in the literature in terms of whether or not cannabis or use of cannabis can cause hair loss. And so, can you talk about that a little bit in terms of what we know now about cannabis and how that can impact us and what we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I think something that's really important. The reason I love researching the plant is because no matter what product you find on the shelf, no matter where you purchase it from, as long as it's organic and not synthetic, it started as a plant. And that's something that's very difficult. Humans, we have this very human focused attachment to cannabis. What method of consumption is it? That's one of the biggest, someone who's saying, hey, I'm smoking this and ingesting smoke, versus someone who says, hey, I am using a topical, which, this external rub, this coconut oil based product. Those are two different methods. So somebody might say, hey, 200 milligrams works. 200 milligrams how? In a beverage? That's a different method of consumption. Is this being digested and processed by your liver? So it's one of the most difficult things when people say, what does cannabis do for you? And I say, well, how is this going into your body? One of the things I will say, the reason I brought up smoking is because there was research that came out, I think 2018, that said vaping can cause oxidative stress, which can mess with your immune system, damage DNA, and that can cause hair loss without you even thinking about how all this stuff is connected. Now, when we're talking about something like a topical or something that you actually rub directly on the skin, that's totally different, because you're essentially avoiding these oxys. You don't have to smoke cannabis. I want to be very, very clear about that. And I think when people hear cannabis, they think smoking. And that's where that research comes in, where somebody might say cannabis causes hair loss. That's a very broad statement. Cannabis causes hair loss. All forms of cannabis. What's the method of consumption? How is it being used? So I always give that disclaimer. There is research showing that vaping and smoking can cause, stress on the body that can cause hair loss. But there's a ton of research now that's coming out that's showing the THC and CBD, they have the same structure. Like if you were to look at the chemical structure, they have the same structure as molecules that we naturally produce. So now we're learning, hey, this is more of a possible supplementation, right? If you're low on vitamin D, you take a vitamin D supplement. But we didn't know about these cannabinoids that we make naturally, right, prior to the 90s. So now we're finding out that's why cannabis is working, because cannabis, THC, right, has the same molecular structure as anandamide, which is what we make. And the reason I love anandamide is because as someone who worked in wellness and fitness, they told us that the runner's high was based off endorphins. It turns out the runner's high is actually anandamide, this cannabinoid that we produce naturally. So all that to say, because I want to make that make sense, the reason I bring all that up is all forms of cannabis are not equal. The method by which you use cannabis is not the same. So yes, vaping, smoking, those things have been shown. That's why it can sound contradictory, because those things have been shown to cause hair loss. But through topicals and other methods of using cannabis, there are studies that are showing this is actually able to stimulate hair growth.
Right. And so that brings me to what I heard at one of the conferences that I attended, because the researcher introduced like tannins. So tannins is a component, or like I said, I brought you on here because you're more of an expert than I am. And so I believe that there's like a constituent to the molecule that, makes it active in some capacity. So can you talk a little bit about tannins and the research that has been done in terms of how it can help with hair loss?
Sorry, can you say that again? I froze for a second. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was just talking about tannins, because tannins is a component that has been shown in some research to help with hair loss. So can you tell us what tannins is and what you know about it?
Sorry, I'm freezing. I'm sorry. What did you say?
That's okay. Tannins.
Oh, tannins. So because I do more research on the plant itself, I'm less versed on tannins, so I don't want to overstep my boundaries, because I do work with pharmacists and I do want to respect what they do as far as pharmacology and dynamics. But as far as are you talking about in response to like the actual receptors themselves and
The actual receptors, and then there are some papers that show that tannins can be beneficial. Like if you substitute one of you talked about the structure of cannabinoids. And so when you substitute tannins for another another constituent for on the molecule, that it can be effective.
right? So this is an interesting concept. Have you heard of endocannabinoid tonality or tone?
I have.
So this is kind of based around that principle. So this endocannabinoid system is essentially what I like to call it, like a master regulator. It's always watching. It always wants to have a say in everything that's going on, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, all the way down to hair follicle stimulation or hair loss. So there's the theory out there that the natural cannabinoids that we're producing, if CB1 and CB2 receptors are responsible for hair growth and hair follicles, if you're low or deficient in these natural cannabinoids, you could actually possibly supplement the same, right, THC, same structure molecule, and your body, I don't want to say it won't know the difference, but it could stimulate the same receptor. So some of these autoimmune deficiencies, there's things like, I've seen a lot of research on alopecia, so people who are losing their hair, and they found out that a lot of it is that the cannabinoid receptors are essentially either underwhelmed or overwhelmed. They're overstimulated or overstimulated. So what they call that is there's either a lowering of the tonality, or there's an overstimulation of the tonality of the endocannabinoid system.
So you have to have balance. It has to be right in the middle for you to get benefit.
Right. So if you're, if I'm something as simple as being stressed out, right, can cause hair loss. And when you think about that, it's like, oh, that's crazy. Why is me being stressed out causing hair loss? Right. Well, you're the big organism and you're not thinking about what's going on these smaller levels. So if you're stressed out, your cortisol is always high. You are sending every system in your body, it's a slow deleterious, like, hey, it started off with blood pressure. Now I'm losing my hair. And what we're finding out is that, again, the endocannabinoid system is involved in all of this. So again, people might say, hey, I consume cannabis and I feel better. Well, that's great, but what's actually happening in the body? Maybe you're low in anandamide, which is actually called the bliss molecule, right? And you supplement THC, and now you're like, I feel better. There's no difference if we're talking about, hey, I'm losing, if we can figure this out, I got some patches right here. We can fill in. But if there's a way that you can supplement whatever is causing these hair follicles to not grow the same as the hair follicles around them, maybe then you can stimulate hair growth for a ton of different reasons that people are, going through hair loss issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the researcher, his name was Gregory Smith, and he was talking about how tannins, so if you modify the cannabinoid to incorporate tannins, that it has a synergistic effect, that it can actually help with hair growth. And so it's really intriguing to me because of me being a hair scientist and wanting to understand a little bit more. And there have been some research that's been done to show benefits, but the research that I've seen hasn't been all inclusive. And so, just last week, I think we found out about the cholesterol, HDL. You have LDL and HDL, and found out that for certain populations, they singled out the Black population and showing that Black people don't really benefit from having the high good cholesterol as they thought. So I, there's some specificity that we don't understand as scientists and researchers. So I think more research needs to be done. So even though there is a product, what I have elected to do for this particular product that they're selling that is CBD based, that if anyone is interested in it, I would love to support research through practitioners who already use it or who want to use it. So that is my contribution to try to understand things a little bit more. But you're right, we are just at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to really having an in-depth understanding of what it can do for us, particularly with hair loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, I think when we kind of put into perspective that the system was not discovered until the 90s. I know a lot of people right now, I don't want to say there's an attack on science, but there's this very, well, you guys said this, you guys said that. And I tell people as scientists, we say that the research suggests, the current research, the current methods that we have right before the 1800s, Mendel hadn't talked about DNA. So they were, right. So as you discover new things, then you say, hey, the research now suggests this. We thought that this was going on, and now research suggests this. So I think it's very, very important that people know their sources. People don't get caught up in misinformation. There's a ton of misinformation when it comes to cannabis, because this is still something that's illegal in some states and legal in some states. So if there's what's the word? If there's a motive behind saying that it's negative, you have to just make sure that you're getting the truth from a credible source.
You are so right. And so you talked about legal in some states, illegal in others. Let's talk about federal law, because I personally think that because it still is a illegal substance, that research is being hindered as a result of just the inconsistency across the United States. And Janice Knox was saying that the research in other countries are way ahead of what we have going on here. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so it's very, very interesting, and I'll choose my words wisely. It is pretty funny to see countries that don't yet have legal cannabis ahead of us in cannabis research. And I'll say that again. It's interesting seeing countries that, cannabis is not legal anywhere in their country, but they left the research to the actual medical scientists. They left it to researchers. In our country, most of our cannabis research prior to the 1990s was done by NIDA, which is the National Institute on Drug Abuse.
Mm.
So if you look at a lot of the research in the United States, it was done by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. They were not funding to find benefits of cannabis. They were funded to find reasons to keep cannabis illegal.
Wow.
Most people don't know. Most of the research in the United States, if you look at the 60s all the way before that, they are talking about, hey, cannabis gets you high. Being high is bad. And that's pretty much like as broad as it goes. They're not talking about that there's 140 cannabinoids, there's 200 terpenes or essential oils that are in this plant. And all of those things are causing different effects. So to answer your question, because this is my most passionate subject, the DEA has a schedule of drugs. Cannabis shouldn't be on there in the first place, but cannabis is actually at the highest schedule of drugs. I think there's five schedules. Schedule 1 has heroin, LSD, psilocybin or like mushrooms, and cannabis. Um, I think fentanyl is like schedule 2 or 3. Ambien, steroids, all lower than Vicodin, all lower than cannabis is. And the DEA actually says that cannabis has no currently accepted medical uses and a high potential for abuse. That is the definition of Schedule 1. High potential for abuse and no currently accepted medical uses. This directly contradicts the FDA approval of a cannabis-based medicine in 2018, which was Epidiolex.
Mhm.
Epidiolex is a medicine approved by the FDA to give to children who have Dravet's syndrome, which is a rare form of epilepsy and seizures.
Oh, wow.
So if this is safe enough for the FDA to approve and give to kids 2 years old and older, why would the DEA then contradict the FDA and say that there's no currently accepted medical uses? And that is one of the biggest, I call it a gridlock. You can't say two things by two governing bodies that contradict each other. When it comes to federal legislation, that is the issue with research. If I want to go do research on cocaine, for instance, it's easier to get a research DEA license for cocaine because it's like Schedule 2 or 3. Because back in the day, they used it as what was it? They used it as a pain relief for surgery, numbing.
Mhm.
Cannabis, it says no medical uses. So they're like, why would you be wanting to? Why would you want to research this plant if there's no medical uses? So it's a great hindrance to the research, even with everything we have now. If the DEA was to remove it or even deschedule it lower and say, yes, this plant does have medical uses, we're going to stop saying it doesn't have any medical uses. That would increase research exponentially, and we could really, really move forward as far as widening our understanding of cannabis.
Wow. So I want to get back to hair just a little bit. So we're like on the forefront of really understanding its potential. Um, it's been shown that there are receptors in the hair follicle themselves. And so I would say it definitely has huge potential, but we still have to understand it. And we always see something beneficial or not beneficial before we can understand it. And so, one of the things that I really want to do is be a part of any activities that have to do with knowledge in that particular area. So, I would love to understand it a little bit more. And so, I would say if there are practitioners who see this, and so let me look at the camera. So if you are a practitioner and you are using a CBD type product, or you're interested in having a CBD type product studied or at your fingertips for you to use, that has been approved in terms of having all the safety data, then contact me because I would love to understand that a little bit more. So, from your standpoint, what do we still need to learn when it comes to, understanding the effects of CBD or any other type of cannabinoid? You're saying there are over 140 different types.
Yes, and it's so funny because you'll hear every couple months somebody will say, "Hey, there's a new cannabinoid that's been discovered. There's a new cannabinoid that's been discovered." I just told you there's 140. Most people haven't heard more than 5. So there's this class of molecules, but we have not really looked into anything other than THC and CBD. So what I would say is
Mhm.
understand that there's more than just THC and CBD in cannabis. And in some
Okay.
of these products, there's more than just THC and CBD. So what I want to say is my tip for people is look at the labels. All CBD is not created equally, it's not all sourced equally. And just seeing the word CBD on something, unless it's an isolate and it's pure CBD, 99.9999% pure CBD, which it would still have a label that said that. Um, you need to make sure you know what's in your product. All CBD is not created equally. If you do not have a test that actually shows you how this was created, how this was extracted, I could be selling you a placebo. I could sell you in. That's why it's at gas stations. That's why it's at CVS. That's why
Yep.
it's everywhere, and it's not
Okay.
all equal. It's like anything, getting something from Whole Foods, getting something from the vitamin shop. and then getting something from your actual doctor are going to be totally different, even if they all say they're the same thing. So I think it's really, really important that we as consumers understand our power. We as educators understand our power. We
Yeah.
as practitioners you influence the industry. Don't let the industry influence you. Don't go out there and say, hey, CBD's good, so I'm going to use it. It's not that simple,
Yep.
right? It's
Yep.
not as simple as CBD is good. CBD always does this. Maybe CBD with coconut oil is different than CBD with another type of oil. Maybe CBD with THC helps better for one condition than just CBD by itself. This conversation is going to keep going for decades and decades. But I think the biggest thing for people to know is it's not black and white at all. It is not just use CBD, buy it from anywhere. I'm going to buy the $15 CBD from the gas station and I'm going to use that and compare it to, that $115 CBD that came with a test, certificate of analysis showing
Thank you.
this was extracted this method. Here's the residual solvents. What's residual solvents? Well, we use butane and propane to actually make this product, and we need you to know that we actually removed all of it so that it's within a health and safety standard. There are no national standards for testing of cannabis products, and therefore I can sell you pretty much anything if you're not willing to ask questions and look at the labels.
You said it. Anyone who has seen me in the past, I have talked about certificate of analyses and how important it is for us to understand what it is we're putting on and in our bodies. And it's really scary, especially when it comes to different types of supplements, when they refuse to give you a certificate of analysis or prove that they do third-party testing to make sure that it's safe, or that it has been confirmed what is in it. So qualitatively, it's the quality that you want, and quantitatively, it has the amounts that they say that it has. And so you're absolutely right. The certificate of analysis is extremely important. So from what I'm hearing from you is, if someone wants CBD, it's important for them to know the source, that they aren't going to understand like how it's been extracted, but that also plays a role, which is why you need a certificate of analysis to begin with. So, I mean, it's all types of factors that can go into the quality, which is and why you have to pay in the hundreds for others, because it just depends upon the due diligence that they've done. So thank you
Yeah,
for
and
sharing.
I equate it to right now we are in, and none of us know what it's like, but alcohol was illegal and now it's a huge industry. It has standards. There's a very specific way that you have to do things, that you have to test your beer for bacteria and these different things. With cannabis right now, it's like a free game. And in everybody's state, they test for different things. The requirements are different. So you may buy something in California, and California has regulations that say, hey, don't worry about it. Every product here is tested. Maryland and Missouri just legalized. You may go there and they may not have regulations yet. So you're just buying products assuming that it's safe, but you didn't ask the right questions. So I think as practitioners start asking more questions, it will raise the bar for the industry. I think people won't be able to get away with selling cheap products that aren't beneficial, because practitioners will start saying, hey, I don't want the $15 CBD if it doesn't have a COA, if I don't know where it's sourced from. And that will essentially raise the expectation of producers. Right now, people producing it know that anything will buy it. They know anybody will buy it. And that's the issue.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Wow. This has been great. I just want to acknowledge another person who's on LinkedIn. So there's no name. It says, hello, Dr. Porter. A consumer here listening and learning. Awesome. Thank you for joining. And then Eugenia Porter says, now that's the truth. And she said that when we were talking about how stress can affect the body. So, yeah. Awesome. Well, if you have any questions, now is the time to put it in the chat. But what I want to do is I want to kind of summarize everything that we have talked about, because I think the major thing is, how to stay abreast of CBD research. And then I'm going to repeat what I said earlier in terms of, if there are CBD based products that you want to have involved in research, or you want to test and make sure that there are some things that, if there are benefits, that you can actually get data behind it. So I'll repeat that. But let's kind of summarize, how should people stay abreast of CBD research? Are there like some top things that you want to share?
Yeah, so like the obviously the far extreme is going straight to the research. So Google, was it Google Scholar? I believe it is. You can go to Google Scholar and you can type in hair follicles, CBD. There's a ton of research online. If you're the type of person who really wants to get into the nitty gritty of the research, if you're looking for a summarized version, right, which most people are looking for. So I'm actually a writer, shameless plug, and on the scientific advisory board for a company called the Canigma, CANNIGMA, and I'll put it in the chat. So the Canigma is a group of scientists, doctors, and researchers who look up the most common questions on Google that people type in. Does CBD help hair loss? Does CBD help with this? Does it help with that? So we actually look at those top questions that are asked. And instead of you going to Google Scholar and having to read that long paper, we read those papers for you and we summarize them and make it digestible for everyday people, so that they don't have to go read through those long papers. So the Canigma is something that I'm proud to be a part of. We get, I think, 500,000 organic views a month, for people who are just interested in really knowing, hey, I heard this online, but I'm looking for a scientist to tell me, is this misinformation that's just being spread, or is there some type of fact to this? So we break down the facts, and it's something really, really good. I think that the more people that are educated, I think we change the industry. I think a lot of times we wait for the government to create standards. We wait for policy to create standards. And I think one of the most amazing questions somebody ever asked me was, does science create policy, or does policy create science?
Mm,
And I think it's very interesting. So I think the more people that are educated, they will end up being the driving force to the standardization and the stabilization of this industry. So everyone on this call, everyone listening, you, Dr. Porter, and the amazing work that you do, I think these conversations raise the bar. And the more common they become, if you see some garbage CBD, you're like, hey, what's in that? Where'd it come from? Where's the COA? No, CVS is over here selling trash CBD. It's on the shelf, on a hot shelf, and the CBD is actually breaking down. So these common things, once they become common conversations, I think that's when the industry is going to be stabilized. And, I think we were talking about COVID-19 causing hair loss and different things like that. Hair loss is a very common thing, and it's embarrassing. And I think most people deal with it, or someone close to them, they deal with it. And this is something that I think could be, I don't use this word, I think it could be groundbreaking, honestly, because we're talking about a brand new system. So the Canigma, Google Scholar, I think those are really good sources for people to look at, to understand kind of what's going on, and just understand, if you look every 6 months, there's going to be new research because of how novel this is, because of how new this field is.
yeah. And of course, with hair research, especially with these new products coming out, these are the same types of questions that need to be asked. Where are you sourcing it from? Is it third-party testing? Is there a certificate of analysis, which you said COA? So these are important questions for any type of product that you're buying. And so even though products are regulated, it's based on the honor system. They say that you're supposed to do all your testing, but unfortunately, there are a lot of people going through shortcuts, and that's not cool. So if you've been here, I say question everything, even question me. If I don't have a way to back up what I'm saying, if it's based on experience, then I need to say that. If it's based on research, then I need to cite or provide citations for what it is I'm talking about. So, but thank you so much for that. That's awesome. Eugenia said that it was a great show, and she could even understand it. Very interesting. That's awesome. All right. So I'd like you to tell people how you can be reached.
Yeah, so I share most of my information and most of my public work on LinkedIn. even the articles from the Kenigma that I was talking about. Just Stephen Philpott Jr., not senior. That's my dad. So most of my work is on LinkedIn, but I'll also, I believe, we'll share a link where you can actually.
It's right there.
Oh, there, perfect. So that link will actually connect you, whether you have questions that you want to ask me directly. I'm very open about communication, although I'm busy. I do like to have these conversations because I believe they're really important. And if I can even have one conversation with someone to maybe just send them down a certain path, I'm very open to having those conversations. So LinkedIn is my most accessible. I guess that's where most of my information is, but also that Popple link will take you to my email. You can see some of my research and different things like that.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to leave that up as I wrap things up. So thanks so much. So, if you are watching the replay, be sure to post your comments and questions. Also, if you are one of many people who need help finding a vetted hair professional, you can go to links.maininsights.com/info. I'll put that up now. And so you can always go there to get some resources. And if you have any, excuse me, suggestions for topics, by all means, just put them in the chat. I would love to make sure that the content that I have is relevant for your needs. So always remember that our Black hair matters. And as always, take care and love your hair. All right. Bye bye.